The war room hummed with tension as Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the massive digital display, showing enemy positions across the Pacific theater. Her crisp Navy uniform bore the weight of countless battles, and her steel-gray eyes reflected the burden of decisions that had shaped the course of the conflict. The room fell silent as she prepared to brief the Joint Chiefs on the latest intelligence reports. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned every stripe through blood and sacrifice. "The enemy has positioned 3 carrier groups in formation Delta 7, approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of our advanced fleet." General Morrison, a decorated Army veteran known for his sharp wit and sharper tongue, leaned back in his leather chair. His weathered face bore a slight smirk as he interrupted the briefing. "Admiral Chun, I've been reviewing your service record. Quite impressive, really. Though I have to say, for someone with such a distinguished career, your kill count seems rather modest for a naval commander of your caliber." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing the loaded nature of the comment. Morrison's reputation for testing subordinates was well known, but this felt different. More personal, more cutting. Admiral Chin paused, her finger hovering over the tactical display controls. She had faced enemy fire, navigated through minefields, and commanded vessels in the most dangerous waters on Earth. Yet somehow, this moment in a sterile conference room felt more challenging than any battle she had ever fought. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Chun processed the general's words. She understood the implication perfectly. In modern warfare, naval commanders were often judged by their ability to eliminate threats efficiently. Submarine kills, surface vessel destructions, and successful missile intercepts all contributed to a commander's reputation. Morrison was questioning not just her competence, but her courage. "General Morrison," Chun replied, her voice steady despite the anger building beneath the surface. "I appreciate your interest in my service record. However, I believe there may be some confusion about what constitutes a kill in naval operations." Morrison's smirk widened. "Oh, I think I understand perfectly, Admiral. Ships destroyed, submarines sunk, enemy casualties resulting from your direct orders. The numbers don't lie. Perhaps you've been playing it too safe out there." The other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Secretary of Defense Williams cleared his throat, sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory. Admiral Chun was respected throughout the fleet, and her tactical brilliance was legendary. But Morrison had a point about the kill statistics, and everyone in the room knew it. Chin's mind raced back to her early days as a lieutenant commander. She remembered the first time she had been forced to order the destruction of an enemy vessel. The submarine had been carrying supplies to insurgent forces, but intelligence later revealed it also held civilians who had been forced aboard as human shields. The successful completion of the mission had been marked as a victory in the official reports, but Chin never forgot the faces of the families who had perished because of her orders. "General," she continued, "you're absolutely right that my direct kill count is lower than some of my contemporaries. Would you like to know why?" Morrison nodded, clearly enjoying what he perceived as Chin's discomfort. "Please enlighten us." Chin walked away from the display and moved closer to the conference table, her hands clasped behind her back. 3 years ago, during Operation Neptune's Spear, my task force encountered an enemy destroyer that had been harassing our supply lines for weeks. Standard protocol would have been to engage immediately with our full arsenal. The room was completely silent now, every person hanging on her words. Instead, I ordered my communications officer to transmit on an open frequency. I told the enemy captain that his ship was surrounded and that he had 60 seconds to surrender. No response. I told him he had 30 seconds. Still nothing. Finally, I told him he had 10 seconds before we opened fire. Morrison's expression had shifted from amusement to curiosity. And the ship surrendered. All hands were taken prisoner. And we discovered that the vessel was carrying critical intelligence about enemy positions throughout the region. Information that led to the successful conclusion of 3 major operations and saved an estimated 2,000 Allied lives. Chen paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. But, according to the official statistics, my kill count remained unchanged. The ship wasn't destroyed, the crew wasn't eliminated. By your metrics, General Morrison, it was a failure. The general's smirk had completely disappeared. He leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. Continue. 6 months later, during the Battle of Coral Ridge, my destroyers encountered a submarine wolf pack. For enemy subs, all armed with long-range torpedoes. My sonar operator detected them at maximum range, giving us perhaps 3 minutes before they could lock onto our position. Chun moved back to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across the controls to bring up a historical battle map. Standard engagement would have called for immediate torpedo spread, maximum yield. But I noticed something in their formation pattern. They were arranged in a defensive cluster, not an attack formation. These weren't hunters, they were running. Running from what? Secretary Williams asked, drawn into the narrative despite himself. That's exactly what I wondered. So instead of engaging, I ordered all stop and went silent. We drifted for 47 minutes while I tried to understand what they were fleeing from. The map on the display shifted, showing the movement patterns of both Allied and enemy forces during that engagement. Turns out they were carrying the families of enemy naval officers, evacuating them from a base that was about to be overrun by our ground forces. Attacking those submarines would have meant killing hundreds of women and children. Morrison's face had grown serious. What did you do? I surfaced my command vessel and broadcast a message in their language. I told them they had safe passage to neutral waters, but that any deviation from their current course would be considered an act of war. They could have turned around and attacked you, General Morrison observed. They could have, Chin agreed. But they didn't. They proceeded to neutral waters, and 3 days later, the enemy navy offered to negotiate a prisoner exchange. Those families became bargaining chips that brought home 43 of our own people who had been held in enemy camps for months. The room remained silent as Chun continued her presentation. She brought up casualty reports, mission success rates, and strategic outcome analyses. The data painted a picture of a commander who consistently achieved objectives with minimal loss of life on both sides. My kill count is low, General Morrison, because I don't measure success by how many people die. I measure it by how many people live. Every enemy sailor who surrenders instead of fighting to the death is one less person trying to kill my crew. Every diplomatic solution is one less battle that my people have to fight. Morrison studied the data on the screen, his expression thoughtful. But surely there are times when decisive action is necessary. When diplomacy fails. Chin's expression hardened slightly. Of course there are. Last month, during the engagement at Blackwater Strait, I encountered an enemy cruiser that was shelling civilian evacuation sites. No warning, no attempt at communication. They were deliberately targeting non-combatants. She pulled up another tactical display, this one showing a more recent battle. I ordered a full missile barrage. The ship was destroyed with all hands within 90 seconds. Because in that moment, diplomacy wasn't an option. Protection of civilians was the only consideration. The display showed the complete annihilation of the enemy vessel and the subsequent rescue operations that saved over 800 civilian lives. So to answer your original question, General Morrison, my kill count is exactly what it needs to be. No higher, no lower. Every death under my command serves a purpose, and every life spared serves a greater purpose. Morrison nodded slowly, his respect for the Admiral clearly growing. That's a difficult balance to maintain. It is, Chin agreed. But that's what command means. It's not about accumulating statistics or building a reputation. It's about making the hard choices that others can't or won't make. The briefing continued with a new energy. The other officers contributed insights and asked strategic questions, but the dynamic in the room had shifted. Morrison's challenge had backfired, revealing not weakness in Chin's record, but a depth of character and strategic thinking that elevated her above her peers. As the meeting concluded, Secretary Williams approached Chin privately. That was masterfully handled, Admiral. Morrison needed to hear that perspective. Chin gathered her files, her expression neutral. General Morrison is a good soldier and a fine leader. But he measures success differently than I do. That doesn't make either of us wrong, just different. The President has been asking about you, Williams continued. There's talk of a new position opening up. Joint Chiefs material. Chin paused in her preparations to leave. With respect, sir, I'm needed in the field. My place is with my ships and my people. Even if that position could prevent conflicts rather than just winning them. The question hung in the air as Chun considered its implications. She had built her career on the principle that the best battle was the one you never had to fight. A position on the Joint Chiefs could give her the influence to prevent wars instead of just ending them. "I'll consider it," she said finally. As she left the war room, Admiral Chun reflected on the conversation with General Morrison. His challenge had forced her to articulate something she had always known but rarely expressed. Her approach to command wasn't about weakness or hesitation. It was about understanding that true strength lay in knowing when not to use force as much as knowing when to use it. The Pacific Fleet awaited her return, and there were still battles to be fought. But perhaps, if she accepted the promotion that Williams had hinted at, there might be fewer battles for the next generation of commanders to fight. And maybe that was worth considering. 3 weeks after the war room incident, Admiral Chin found herself aboard the USS Columbia, her flagship, cutting through rough Pacific waters toward what intelligence suggested could be the largest naval engagement of the conflict. The morning briefing had revealed disturbing intelligence about enemy movements, and Chin knew that her philosophy of minimal casualties would face its greatest test yet. Commander Rodriguez, her executive officer, approached with the latest reconnaissance reports. His usually steady demeanor showed signs of strain as he handed her the encrypted tablet. "Admiral, satellite imagery confirms it. The enemy has assembled a massive fleet, 12 kilometers wide, positioned directly in our primary shipping lane. They're not just blocking our supply route, they're preparing for a full engagement." Chin studied the tactical data, her mind automatically calculating distances, weapon ranges, and potential casualties. The enemy force was larger than anything they had faced before, and their positioning suggested they were ready for a prolonged battle. "What's our fleet status?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the display. 8 destroyers, 4 cruisers, 2 submarines, and the Columbia. We're outnumbered 3-1, but our technology advantages might level the playing field. Chin nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The conversation with General Morrison had been weighing on her mind, particularly his comments about her kill count and her approach to command. She wondered if her reluctance to engage in total warfare had somehow emboldened the enemy to mass such a large force against them. "Admiral," Rodriguez continued, "Captain Harrison from the destroyer Valiant is requesting permission to launch a preemptive strike. His sonar has detected what he believes is a submarine preparing to attack." "Denied," Chin replied without hesitation. "We maintain defensive positions until we have confirmed hostile intent." Rodriguez looked surprised. "Ma'am, with respect, if we wait for them to fire first, we could lose ships." Chin turned to face her executive officer, recognizing the doubt in his voice. It was the same doubt she had heard from Morrison, and it troubled her to see it spreading to her own crew. "Commander, how long have you served under my command?" 2 years, 4 months, Admiral. "And how many ships have we lost in that time?" Rodriguez thought for a moment. "None, ma'am. We've had damaged vessels, but no complete losses." "And how many enemy vessels have we destroyed?" 17 confirmed, Admiral. Chin moved to the ship's large viewing window, watching the gray Pacific stretch endlessly toward the horizon. 17 enemy ships destroyed, 0 friendly vessels lost, and over 4,000 enemy personnel captured rather than killed. "That's not luck, Commander. That's strategy." Rodriguez joined her at the window, his expression thoughtful. "But this situation is different, Admiral. The enemy force is too large for our usual diplomatic approaches." "Is it?" Chin asked. "Tell me, Commander, what do you know about the enemy fleet commander?" "Vice Admiral Takashi Yamamoto, Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Highly decorated, known for aggressive tactics and innovative naval strategies. Intelligence suggests he's been specifically assigned to counter your methods." Chin smiled slightly. "Yamamoto. I've read his tactical papers. Brilliant strategist, but he has one significant characteristic that most people overlook, which is he's never lost a single ship under his command, either. Not one. His aggressive tactics are actually designed to end conflicts quickly to minimize casualties on both sides." Rodriguez looked confused. "Then, why is he massing such a large force against us?" "Because he's afraid," Chin replied. "He's heard about our diplomatic successes, our prisoner exchanges, our unconventional approaches. He doesn't know how to respond to an enemy who doesn't behave like an enemy." The communication system crackled to life, interrupting their conversation. Admiral Chun to the bridge, priority communication incoming. Chun and Rodriguez quickly made their way to the command center, where the communications officer was adjusting frequency settings with obvious urgency. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission on multiple frequencies. It's directed specifically at you, by name. Chun settled into her command chair, nodding for the officer to proceed. The speakers filled with static before a clear, accented voice emerged. Admiral Sarah Chun of the United States Navy. This is Vice Admiral Yamamoto of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. I am speaking to you directly because I believe we may have more in common than our respective governments realize. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of ocean waves against the hull. Chun considered her response carefully before signaling the communications officer. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, this is Admiral Chun. I'm listening. Admiral Chun, your reputation precedes you. Your unconventional methods and your emphasis on preserving life, even enemy life, have not gone unnoticed in our fleet. I find myself in a situation where standard military doctrine demands that I engage your forces, but my personal observations suggest that such an engagement would be wasteful and unnecessary. Rodriguez shot a glance at Chun, clearly surprised by the enemy commander's openness. Chun leaned forward. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, I appreciate your candor. What are you proposing? A meeting. Face to face, commanding officer to commanding officer. Neutral waters, minimal escort. If we are going to fight, let us at least understand why. If we can avoid fighting, let us understand how. The bridge crew exchanged surprised looks. In the history of modern naval warfare, such direct communication between opposing fleet commanders was almost unheard of. Admiral, Rodriguez whispered urgently, this could be a trap. Intelligence shows no precedent for this kind of direct negotiation. Chun held up a hand, signaling for quiet. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, such a meeting would be highly irregular. My government would need to approve any direct negotiations, as would mine, Admiral Chun. However, both of our governments have authorized us to use our best judgment in preventing unnecessary casualties. I believe a brief conversation between professional naval officers falls within those parameters. Chun stood and walked to the tactical display, studying the positions of both fleets. The enemy force was indeed massive, but their formation suggested defensive rather than offensive positioning. If Yamamoto had wanted to launch a surprise attack, he would have arranged his ships differently. Commander Rodriguez, she said quietly, what's your assessment of their fleet positioning? Rodriguez studied the display for a moment. It's strong defensively, but not optimized for attack. If they wanted to hit us hard and fast, they'd have spread their formation wider and positioned their submarines for flanking maneuvers. Exactly, Chun agreed. She turned back to the communications station. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, I'm willing to meet. What did you have in mind? There is a small island, uninhabited, approximately 15 kilometers north of your current position. Cartographical designation India 77. Each of us brings one escort vessel, and we meet on the beach with minimal security details. Chun checked her charts. The island was indeed neutral territory, officially unclaimed by any nation and too small to have strategic value. Give me 30 minutes to consult with my staff, she replied. Understood. I will await your response. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Chun called for an immediate staff meeting in her ready room, and within minutes, her senior officers had assembled around the polished conference table. Gentlemen, I want honest opinions. Is this a trap? Captain Myers, her intelligence officer, spoke first. Admiral, there's no precedent for this kind of direct communication. Every tactical manual warns against exactly this type of enemy contact. But, Chun prompted, sensing hesitation. But our analysis of Yamamoto's service record shows a pattern of unconventional problem-solving. 3 years ago, he ended a potential conflict with the Chinese Navy through direct negotiation rather than engagement. Last year, he coordinated a joint rescue operation with Australian forces to save civilians from a sinking ferry, despite the fact that Australia and Japan were technically in dispute over territorial waters. Commander Rodriguez added his perspective. Admiral, if we don't meet with him, we're looking at a major naval battle. Even if we win, we'll lose ships and people. If we do meet with him, The worst-case scenario is that we're walking into an ambush, but we'd be no worse off than if we fought the entire fleet. Chen considered the advice from her officers. Her instincts told her that Yamamoto was sincere, but years of military training warned her against trusting an enemy commander, regardless of his reputation. There's another consideration, she said finally. This conflict has been escalating for months, with both sides taking increasingly aggressive positions. If Yamamoto and I can find common ground, we might be able to prevent not just this battle, but future conflicts. Her communications officer looked up from his station. Admiral, we're receiving another transmission from Vice Admiral Yamamoto. Put it through. Yamamoto's voice filled the room again, this time with a more personal tone. Admiral Chun, I want to share something with you that is not in my official record. My grandfather was a naval officer during World War II. He served with distinction, but he also witnessed the devastating consequences of naval warfare taken to its extreme. Before his death, he made me promise that I would never allow pride or politics to prevent me from seeking peaceful solutions when they were possible. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. Her own grandfather had served in the Pacific Theater during the same war, and had shared similar stories about the costs of naval warfare. Admiral, Yamamoto continued, I believe that both of our grandfathers would approve of us talking before shooting. They understood that the greatest victory is the one that prevents a war, not the one that wins it. The room fell silent as Chun considered Yamamoto's words. Finally, she signaled the communications officer. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, I accept your proposal. I will meet you at Island India 77 in 2 hours. Each of us brings one escort vessel and a security detail of no more than 6 personnel. Agreed, Admiral Chun. I look forward to our conversation. As the transmission ended, Chun looked around the room at her officers. Gentlemen, prepare the USS Determination to accompany us to the meeting site. Full defensive posture, but no aggressive positioning. We're going to try something that hasn't been attempted in modern naval warfare. Commander Rodriguez stood. Admiral, what should we tell the fleet? Tell them that we're exploring all options before committing to battle. And Rodriguez. Yes, ma'am. Make sure our weapon systems are fully operational, just in case I'm wrong about Yamamoto's intentions. 2 hours later, Admiral Chen found herself standing on a small, sandy beach watching a Japanese naval vessel approach the island. The USS Determination floated at anchor 500 meters offshore, its guns trained not on the enemy's ship, but on the horizon, ready to defend if necessary, but not positioned to threaten the meeting. As Yamamoto's boat reached the shore, Chen studied the man who had requested this unprecedented meeting. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. Admiral Chun, Yamamoto said as he stepped onto the beach, offering a formal bow. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, Chen replied, returning the bow with a respectful nod. I must admit, this is not how I expected to spend my afternoon. Yamamoto smiled slightly. Nor I. But perhaps the unexpected is exactly what our situation requires. The two admirals walked along the pristine beach, their security details maintaining respectful distances while staying alert for any signs of deception. The island was smaller than Chun had expected, perhaps 2 kilometers long and half a kilometer wide, covered in rough grass and scattered palm trees that swayed in the Pacific breeze. Admiral Chun, Yamamoto began. Before we discuss the current tactical situation, I must ask you something that has been troubling me since I began studying your service record. Chen glanced at him curiously. What's that? Why did you spare the crew of the destroyer Akashi last year during the Battle of Crimson Reef? According to our records, you had them completely outgunned and outmaneuvered. Your torpedoes were locked on target, and you could have ended the engagement in seconds. Chen paused, remembering the incident. The Akashi had been caught in a vulnerable position during a supply run, and standard military doctrine would have called for immediate destruction of the enemy vessel. Your records are correct, she replied. But, tell me, what else do your records show about that engagement? Yamamoto looked puzzled. The Akashi reported mechanical failures, and your ships provided assistance with repairs before escorting them to neutral waters. Many of my colleagues believed it was an intelligence operation, that you were hoping to gain information about our fleet capabilities. Shin stopped walking and turned to face Yamamoto directly. Your colleagues were wrong. The truth is much simpler and much more complicated. I don't understand. Vice Admiral, what do you know about the cargo the Akashi was carrying that day? Yamamoto's expression grew thoughtful. Medical supplies and food rations for our forward bases. Nothing of significant military value. That's what your official report said. Shin agreed. But my intelligence officer discovered something else. Hidden in those medical supplies were experimental medications for treating radiation sickness. Your scientists had developed new treatments that were desperately needed by our own personnel who had been exposed during the incident at Facility Bravo 7. Yamamoto's eyes widened with understanding. You spared the Akashi because you needed those medical supplies. Partially, Shin said, resuming their walk. But that wasn't the only reason. My communications officer intercepted personal messages from the crew to their families. 37 sailors aboard that ship had children under the age of 5. Destroying the vessel would have meant creating 37 orphans. But surely the mission objectives outweighed personal considerations? Shin picked up a piece of driftwood and threw it into the waves. Vice Admiral, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you have children? Yamamoto hesitated before answering. A daughter. She's 8 years old. When you're making tactical decisions, do you ever think about her? Every day, Yamamoto admitted. I think about the world I'm helping to create for her generation. Then, you understand, Shin said. When I saw those messages from the Akashi crew to their children, I had a choice. I could follow protocol and destroy the ship, completing my mission objectives and adding to my kill count. Or I could find another way that achieved the same strategic goals without creating orphans. And the medical supplies? After we escorted the Akashi to neutral waters, I contacted the Red Cross. I explained that both our forces had personnel suffering from radiation exposure, and that cooperation might save lives on both sides. Within 48 hours, we had arranged a medical exchange. Your scientists shared their radiation treatments, and our doctors provided surgical expertise for your wounded personnel. Yamamoto stared at the ocean, clearly processing this information. Our official reports never mentioned the medical exchange. Military bureaucracies rarely document cooperation with enemy forces, Shin observed. It complicates the narrative of clear-cut victory and defeat. They continued walking in silence for several minutes before Yamamoto spoke again. Admiral Chun, I must confess something to you. This meeting was not entirely my idea. Shin stopped walking, her hand instinctively moving toward her sidearm. Explain. Please, don't be alarmed, Yamamoto said quickly. There is no deception here. What I mean is that my government has been watching your methods with great interest. Some of my superiors believe that you represent a new approach to naval warfare, one that might make traditional conflicts obsolete. And what do you believe? I believe that you're proving something that military strategists have argued about for centuries, that the strongest force is often the one that chooses not to fight. Shin relaxed slightly, but remained alert. That's a dangerous philosophy for a military officer. Is it? Or is it evolution? Yamamoto gestured toward their ships waiting offshore. Admiral Chun, we have enough firepower between our two fleets to devastate each other completely. But what would that accomplish? My ships would sink yours would sink mine, thousands of sailors would die, and neither of our nations would be any safer. Sometimes violence is necessary, Shin pointed out. Sometimes diplomacy fails. Agreed. But shouldn't we try every other option first? Shin studied Yamamoto's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. All she saw was a man who seemed genuinely committed to finding alternatives to warfare. Vice Admiral, what exactly are you proposing? Yamamoto reached into his uniform pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope. My government has authorized me to present you with a formal proposal. A joint naval exercise designed to test defensive capabilities rather than offensive ones. Instead of fighting each other, we would coordinate responses to simulated threats. Shin took the envelope, but didn't open it. This would require approval from my government at the highest levels. As would my participation, Yamamoto agreed. But, Admiral Chun, consider what we could accomplish. If two opposing fleets can work together effectively, it demonstrates that cooperation is possible even in the most contentious circumstances. And if it fails, then we fight, as we would have fought anyway. But we will have attempted something unprecedented. Chen opened the envelope and quickly read the proposal inside. The document outlined a complex series of joint exercises, including coordinated responses to submarine threats, shared radar coverage of potential attack routes, and cooperative rescue operations for downed aircraft. This is incredibly detailed, she observed. How long has your government been working on this? 6 months, Yamamoto replied. Ever since the incident with the Akashi. Your actions that day convinced some of my superiors that traditional naval warfare might be evolving into something entirely new. Chen folded the document and placed it in her own pocket. I'll need to transmit this to Washington immediately. Of course. But, Admiral, there's one more thing you should know. Which is, this proposal has already been presented to your government through diplomatic channels. Your presence here, your willingness to meet with me face to face, was the final requirement before they would consider approving the plan. Chen stared at Yamamoto in surprise. You mean this entire meeting was a test? Not a test, Yamamoto said carefully. A demonstration. Your government wanted to know if you would be willing to engage directly with enemy commanders in the pursuit of peaceful solutions. My government wanted to know if I could successfully propose cooperation to an officer known for unconventional tactics. And now both our governments have their answers. Chen's communication device crackled to life. Admiral Chen, this is Commander Rodriguez aboard the Columbia. We're receiving priority communications from Fleet Command. Chen activated her device. Patch it through, Commander. The voice of Admiral Harrison, Chief of Naval Operations, filled the air. Admiral Chen, I trust your meeting with Vice Admiral Yamamoto has been productive? Chen shot a look at Yamamoto, who offered a slight smile. Sir, I was not aware that you had advanced knowledge of this meeting. Admiral, we've been monitoring the situation closely. The proposal that Yamamoto is carrying has been under review at the Pentagon for weeks. Your willingness to engage in direct negotiations was the final piece of the puzzle. And your decision, sir? You are hereby authorized to proceed with the joint exercise proposal under your direct command. This is a unique opportunity to demonstrate that American naval forces can lead international cooperation efforts while maintaining our strategic advantages. Chen felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The implications of what they were proposing could reshape naval warfare for generations. Understood, sir. What are my operational parameters? Full discretion, Admiral. You know these waters, and you understand the tactical challenges better than anyone. Make it work. The transmission ended, leaving Chen and Yamamoto alone with the sound of waves and seabirds. Well, Yamamoto said, it appears we have our orders. It appears we do, Chen agreed. But, Vice Admiral, I want something understood between us before we proceed. What's that? If this joint exercise fails, if your forces attempt any hostile actions against my fleet, I will respond with overwhelming force. Cooperation is my preference, but protecting my people is my priority. Yamamoto nodded solemnly. And, if your forces threaten mine, I will defend them with everything at my disposal. I believe we understand each other perfectly, Admiral Chen. They shook hands formally, sealing an agreement that neither of their nations had ever attempted before. How do we begin? Chen asked. With something simple, Yamamoto replied. Tomorrow morning, both our fleets will receive a simulated submarine threat. Instead of competing to neutralize it first, we coordinate our responses, share sonar data, coordinate search patterns, and work together to destroy the simulated enemy. And if our crews resist working together, then we remind them that the greatest military victory is the one that makes future wars unnecessary. Chen looked out at the Pacific, where both their fleets waited for orders. For the first time in months, those orders wouldn't involve preparing for battle. Vice Admiral Yamamoto, she said, I think we're about to discover whether two former enemies can become effective allies. I believe we are, Admiral Chen. And I believe our grandfathers would be proud. As they walked back toward their respective boats, both admirals understood that they were participating in something that could change the nature of naval warfare forever. The question was whether their crews, their governments, and their nations were ready for such a dramatic shift in military philosophy. The next 24 hours would determine whether cooperation could replace conflict, or whether centuries of military tradition would prove too strong to overcome. Dawn broke over the Pacific with unusual calm, as if nature itself was holding its breath for the unprecedented naval exercise about to unfold. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the USS Columbia, watching through binoculars as the Japanese fleet maintained perfect formation exactly 2 kilometers to the east. The morning briefing had confirmed that both fleets were ready for the simulated submarine threat exercise, but tension remained thick throughout both command structures. Commander Rodriguez approached with the latest communications update, his expression revealing the strain of the past 18 hours. "Admiral, we're receiving reports of unrest among some crew members. Petty Officer Williams from the destroyer Valiant has been spreading rumors that this is a trap, that we're being set up for a coordinated attack." Chen lowered her binoculars and turned to face Rodriguez. "What's Captain Harrison's response?" "He's confined Williams to quarters and addressed the crew directly." "But, Admiral, the sentiment isn't limited to one ship. Our sonar operators are questioning whether they should share detection data with enemy forces. Some of the weapons officers are requesting permission to keep targeting systems locked on the Japanese vessels." Chen nodded grimly. She had expected resistance from her crews, but the reality was proving more challenging than anticipated. Military training emphasized identifying and destroying enemy forces and asking sailors to suddenly cooperate with those same enemies went against every instinct they had developed. "Commander, signal all ship captains. I want to address the entire fleet simultaneously in 10 minutes. "Yes, ma'am." "Admiral, there's one more thing. We're receiving similar signals from the Japanese fleet. Vice Admiral Yamamoto is dealing with his own crew concerns." Chen wasn't surprised. Military personnel on both sides had been trained to view each other as threats, and changing that mindset would require more than a simple order from command. 10 minutes later, Admiral Chen's voice carried across the communication systems of every American vessel in the fleet. "This is Admiral Chen speaking to all personnel participating in today's joint exercise. I know that many of you have concerns about working with forces that you were trained to consider enemies. I understand those concerns because I share them." She paused, allowing her words to reach every sailor, every officer, every person who would be participating in this unprecedented operation. "But I want you to understand something that isn't in any manual or training protocol. The greatest strength of the United States Navy isn't our technology, our weapons, or our tactical superiority. Our greatest strength is our ability to adapt, to innovate, and to lead by example." Across the fleet, crews listened intently as their admiral continued. "Today we have an opportunity to demonstrate that American naval forces are so confident, so capable, and so advanced that we can work with any fleet in the world and still maintain our strategic advantages. We're not showing weakness by cooperating with the Japanese Navy. We're showing strength by proving that we can accomplish our objectives regardless of the circumstances." Chen looked out at her fleet, imagining the faces of the men and women who served under her command. "In 1 hour, our simulated exercise will begin. I expect every person in this fleet to perform at the highest level of professional excellence. Show our Japanese counterparts what American naval efficiency looks like. Show them what American cooperation looks like. And, most importantly, show them why the United States Navy is the finest naval force in the world." The transmission ended, and Chun turned to Rodriguez. "Any word from Vice Admiral Yamamoto?" "He's addressing his fleet now, Admiral. Our communications officers are monitoring the frequency." Chun activated her communication system and tuned to the Japanese frequency, listening as Yamamoto spoke to his crews in Japanese. Although she couldn't understand the words, the tone was similar to her own address, firm but encouraging. "Admiral," Rodriguez said, "incoming simulation parameters from Fleet Command." Chen reviewed the exercise details on her tactical display. A simulated enemy submarine had been detected in grid reference Delta 7, approximately 15 kilometers south of both fleets. The submarine was programmed to behave like an advanced nuclear attack vessel, with sophisticated stealth capabilities and long-range torpedoes. "Standard protocol would call for immediate destroyer deployment," Rodriguez observed, studying the parameters. "But we're not following standard protocol today," Chen replied. "Signal Vice Admiral Yamamoto. Ask him to recommend an initial approach." Within minutes, Yamamoto's response arrived. His tactical assessment matched Chen's own, suggesting a coordinated sonar sweep followed by depth charge deployment from multiple angles. Interesting, Chen murmured. He's recommending the same approach I was considering. Admiral, the sonar operator called out. We're detecting the simulated submarine signature. Bearing 270, range approximately 12 kilometers. The simulation is running active. Chen activated her fleet communication system. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Execute coordinated search pattern Alpha 7. Share all sonar data with Japanese vessels immediately. She switched to the direct communication link with Yamamoto. Vice Admiral, we have initial contact. Recommend combined approach using your destroyers for northern sweep and ours for southern approach. Yamamoto's reply was immediate. Agreed, Admiral Chen. My destroyers are moving to positions. Estimate contact in 12 minutes. Chen watched her tactical display as both fleets moved into coordinated positions. American and Japanese destroyers spread out in complementary search patterns, their sonar systems working together to triangulate the simulated submarine's position. Admiral, her weapons officer reported, Japanese destroyer Asahi is reporting sonar contact. They're transmitting coordinates now. The tactical display updated with data from the Japanese vessel, showing a refined position for the simulated submarine. Chen's own sonar operators confirmed the readings and added their own detection data. Beautiful, Chen murmured, watching the combined information create a precise location for the target. Two fleets working together can pinpoint targets twice as fast as either fleet working alone. Commander Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Admiral, with this level of coordination, we could neutralize the simulated threat in under 5 minutes. Signal all vessels, Chen ordered. Prepare coordinated depth charge deployment on my mark. Both fleets moved into final attack positions, with American and Japanese destroyers creating a perfect circle around the simulated submarine's position. The level of coordination was flawless, as if the two fleets had been training together for years. All vessels report ready, Rodriguez announced. Chen opened the communication link to Yamamoto. Vice Admiral, are your forces ready? Ready, Admiral Chen. On your command. All vessels, execute depth charge deployment in 3, 2, 1 mark. The simulation registered multiple simultaneous depth charge explosions, creating a coordinated attack pattern that would have been impossible for either fleet to achieve alone. The simulated submarine was destroyed completely, with no chance for escape or counterattack. Exercise complete, Chen announced to both fleets. Simulated threat neutralized with 0 friendly casualties and maximum efficiency. The communication systems erupted with congratulations and excited chatter from both American and Japanese crews. The exercise had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, demonstrating that cooperative naval operations were not only possible, but potentially more effective than traditional competitive approaches. Admiral, Rodriguez said, his voice filled with amazement. Our response time was 40% faster than our best single-fleet performance. The coordination was flawless. Chen smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced in traditional naval exercises. Commander, signal Vice Admiral Yamamoto. I'd like to speak with him privately. Yamamoto's voice came through the communication system with obvious satisfaction. Admiral Chen, that was extraordinary. My sonar operators have never seen such precise targeting data. Vice Admiral, our crews exceeded every expectation. But I'm wondering what our next step should be. I have a suggestion, Yamamoto replied. There's a real situation developing about 200 kilometers east of our position. Merchant vessel in distress, possible engine failure. But they're in waters that have seen enemy submarine activity recently. Chen checked her charts. The location was indeed in contested waters, where both American and Japanese forces had standing orders to investigate potential threats. Are you suggesting a real-world cooperative mission? If both our governments approve, yes. A joint rescue operation would demonstrate that our coordination works in actual emergency situations, not just simulations. Chen considered the proposal. A real rescue mission would test their cooperative abilities under genuine pressure, with actual lives at stake rather than simulation parameters. Vice Admiral, I'll contact Fleet Command for authorization. Can you do the same with your superiors? Already in progress, Admiral. I believe both our governments are eager to see how this cooperation performs in real-world conditions. 20 minutes later, Both admirals received authorization for the joint rescue mission. The merchant vessel was a civilian cargo ship carrying humanitarian supplies, making it a politically safe target for cooperative assistance. Admiral Chun, Yamamoto's voice crackled through the communication system. I propose we split the rescue operation. Your vessels handle search and recovery. My vessels provide security escort through the dangerous waters. Chun agreed immediately. The division of responsibilities played to each fleet's strengths while maintaining the cooperative framework they had established. As both fleets moved toward the rescue coordinates, Chun reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, these same ships had been preparing for battle against each other. Today, they were working together to save lives. Admiral, Rodriguez said, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Pentagon. Chun activated the secure communication channel, expecting routine mission updates. Instead, she heard the voice of the Secretary of Defense. Admiral Chun, I'm calling to personally congratulate you on today's exercise. The joint coordination you achieved exceeded our most optimistic projections. Thank you, sir. Vice Admiral Yamamoto deserves equal credit. His fleet's performance was exemplary. Admiral, I'm calling because the President has been briefed on your innovative approach to naval operations. There's going to be a formal announcement next week about a new position being created, Director of International Naval Cooperation. The job would involve developing cooperative frameworks with allied and neutral navies worldwide. Chun felt her pulse quicken. The position would represent a fundamental shift in how naval forces operated globally. Sir, such a position would be unprecedented. So was everything you accomplished today, Admiral. The President believes that your approach to naval command could revolutionize how conflicts are prevented and resolved. What about my current fleet command? You would retain operational authority over the Pacific Fleet, but with expanded responsibilities for developing international cooperative protocols. Chun looked out at her fleet, now working seamlessly with former enemies to save civilian lives. The rescue operation was proceeding flawlessly, with American and Japanese vessels coordinating their efforts as if they had been training together for years. Sir, I accept the position. Excellent, Admiral. Detailed briefings will follow, but I wanted you to know that your methods are being studied by naval forces worldwide. What you've proven today is that cooperation doesn't weaken military strength, it multiplies it. The transmission ended just as Chun's radar operator reported successful contact with the distressed merchant vessel. The joint rescue operation continued flawlessly, with both fleets working together to escort the civilian ship to safety. As the sun set over the Pacific, Admiral Chun stood on her bridge watching American and Japanese vessels sailing side by side. In the span of a single day, she had transformed a potential battle into a demonstration of international cooperation, proving that even the most traditional military institutions could evolve beyond their historical limitations. The evening brought news that the joint exercise had been so successful that both governments were planning expanded cooperation protocols. Military academies would begin studying the coordination techniques as standard curriculum. Most importantly, the peaceful resolution of the fleet standoff had prevented what could have been a devastating naval battle. Weeks later, when Admiral Chun was asked about her approach to naval command, she would always return to the same principle that had guided her throughout her career. True military strength wasn't measured by the number of enemies defeated, but by the number of conflicts prevented. The greatest victory was the one that made future wars unnecessary. General Morrison's challenge about her kill count had inadvertently highlighted the fundamental difference between traditional and innovative military leadership. While some commanders measured success through destruction, Chun had proven that the most effective leaders measured success through preservation, cooperation, and the creation of lasting peace. The admiral who had once been criticized for her low kill count had become the architect of an entirely new approach to naval warfare, one that prioritized life over death and cooperation over conflict. In the end, her reply to Morrison's challenge hadn't just silenced the critics in the war room. It had changed the entire conversation about what modern military leadership should represent.